thank you so much for joining us today. Grishma will kick off the interview with the first question.
All right, starting off the interview, Ms. Paul, what was your motivation behind starting Refugee Support?
Okay, great. So I have always been interested in a better world, and in fact, I went to university and I studied Latin American studies. I was very interested in Latin America. I wanted to, help in Latin America. But when I finished university, I was 25 or something. Realised that I needed to get a proper job first because you need good skills to be able to go and help with big problems. And then I started doing a market research job, and then I got into a market research career, and I had children, and so then I just got into 2015 when there were an awful lot of refugees coming into Europe, mostly from Syria. There were an awful lot of people stuck in Calais, which is that bit in France just before people get to the UK, and the conditions that those people were living under and the journey they had to make was heartbreaking to watch. It was clear that governments, other organisations were failing to do enough for that many people. So I just thought, well, I've got an opportunity to help. Fortunately, I was running my own business, so I had control over my time. I had a bit of money where I didn't need to work every day. The kids were a bit older. I just thought, I'll go to Calais for a weekend, and I'll just do something for a weekend to feel better, rather than just having the rage, watching the news. And it just grew from there. That one weekend, it was clear there was a need, and there was a vacuum there, really. And I was just in a very fortunate position that I had something to offer at a time when I was able to offer it. So that was the inspiration. It just went from one weekend to just doing more and more and more until I haven't done market research now for 3 years, and I can't see me going back to it, to be honest.
How did you start getting volunteers for the institution?
I went to Calais, and the end of 2015 was full of volunteers. So there were definitely hundreds going every week. A lot of them stayed for a day or 2 days. Some of them were there for months. But it was very, very clear that the desire to help refugees was so strong in people that they were willing to volunteer. So we worked in Calais for about 6 months with volunteers. And then my co-founder, John, went to Greece. And he said, I found a refugee camp in Greece. There's 800 people. They really need some help. Come and have a look. And I just thought, well, this is great. There's a camp here, clearly, run by the Greek army. They know how to be the army, doing what they do. They were clueless when it came to offering people humanitarian support. And John and I had experience in that sense. They agreed to allow us to help, fortunately. And I just thought, well, I'll give up work for a year. And I know that we will get volunteers because the refugee issue is one which really divides people, I think. It's one where, you see, and I was watching something this morning, it's so annoying, distressing, and filled me with fury to see people dismissing refugees and being so hostile towards them. And we see a lot of that. But we also see, we've had 800 volunteers, more than 800, from over 40 countries. In fact, I was just writing for one from India now, actually, so, from all over the world, who've come and helped, and they've given up their time, their money, they've raised funds for us, they've done amazing things. So, sometimes we haven't had enough volunteers, sometimes we've had problems with volunteers, but, it has been one of the best bits about the job.
Thank you.
Paul, you said that the government was failing to help, and how private intervention, like an initiative of yours, has really come up and helped. But how much private intervention today is required, to tackle the shortcomings of the refugee crisis?
I don't think that we are ever going to be able to do enough. It's clear that what is needed are large-scale government interventions and changes in policy. And so, we can campaign and advocate for some of that, but it does feel like, really, all we're doing is putting a sticking plaster on a big gaping wound that's bleeding far too heavily. So, private intervention. I'm a bit ambivalent about it. The philosophical argument is if you see someone drowning in a pool, you don't stand around arguing, who's going to get him and was there enough safety and why was he going near the water anyway? Or you dive in and you help stop them from drowning and dying. And I think that's how I feel sometimes. That as a small organisation with volunteers and a lot of freedom to operate quite quickly, we can go in and we can make a really big impact on a very small scale. And it is only going to be a small scale. One of the very difficult decisions that we've had to make is when we worked in a refugee camp, and we worked in 7 or 8 refugee camps in Greece, there comes a point where you think, I know that I'm helping here. The camps in Greece are no place for people to be living long term. They are good at the short-term policy as a sort of a way to give people some safety, protection and some support. But what you need to do is get people out of that camp very quickly, like a month, maybe 3 months on the outside, and into society, houses, jobs, schools, integrating in the society. And Greece didn't want to do that. So you get to a point where you think our help on this camp is helping the people on the camp, but it's also propping up a corrupt and unjust policy towards refugees.
Refugee Support's motto is aid with dignity, and dignity is at the heart of all your activities. What does leading a dignified life entail according to you, and how can we enable refugees to lead a dignified life?
Yeah, brilliant. I'm so glad you asked that because, when we first started, dignity wasn't our kind of thing. What we wanted to do was, what we talked about was it being fair and kind. Those were our kind of, that was our philosophy. We want to be fair and kind and helpful. But then it became clear that actually, in order to do things in a way that respected people as individuals, that dignity is what became our central philosophy. And one of the things I think that we discovered was that how you deliver dignity really depends on the context where you're working. So it's not necessarily here's how you deliver dignity. It's much more a kind of, a mission, a kind of guiding principle. And what that is how can we take power away from the giver and do as much as possible to put it in the hands of the people who need the help. And then the other one is, how can we do this in a way which gives people the opportunity to say no or to have choices about sort of three models of dignity, depending on the context. So one would be dignity in an emergency environment is giving out things where people don't have a lot of choice, but you do it in a way where everyone has the same opportunity to get whatever it is you're offering. So let's say you're going to give out very simple things like tea, cooking oil, and toilet paper. You don't give out tea and toilet paper to half the people and not to the other half. You don't drive in a van and open the back of a van and start throwing it out to whoever's there. What we did is we created a shop environment, so like one family at a time can come into a shop. And then the next stage, when it was more settled, when it was less of an emergency, is that we printed our own money. And then what we did was we distributed that money on the camp, and then people could come to the shop with that money, and what that did was it enabled them to choose when they could come to the shop and what they wanted from the shop. So if they just wanted like olive oil, which is expensive and they wouldn't get very much of, then fine. If they just wanted Pringles, or fruit juice, or if they want fresh fruit and vegetables. What you're doing is you're removing power away from you as the person offering the charity, and putting the power as much as possible into the hands of those people, so they can come and choose what they want, when they want, and or not. And actually, one of the things that was brilliant was when they came and complained and said, "Look, we don't like apples. You need to be offering more spices. These onions are not good enough quality. We don't like that particular type of rice." When people are saying that to you, you're doing things right. And then the third stage of dignity was about, that's about integration. I think that's about, it's moving away from charity. It's moving away from handouts, and it's giving people the opportunity to make their own money. And so we've tried that with microfinance projects, and it's what we're doing in Cyprus with a sewing space where people are making things, learning skills, and then selling that, or they are learning new languages. We've got some computers, so people are learning computer skills. Things that enable people to then stand on their own 2 feet. The cliche is, you give a man a fish and he can eat for a day, but give him a fishing rod and he can eat for life. It's that kind of, that's moving. It's sort of moving as far as possible towards that. But it depends on the context.
We had the chance to read your article on Fair Planet. You said something very interesting in the article, that people who already have trauma and loss in their lives feel abandoned, and a sense of purpose is helping to turn them around or prevent them from getting worse. How does refugee support ignite the sense of purpose?
Oh God, yeah. I think where that worked really well was on the refugee camp in Greece, where we had started to move towards that third model of dignity. And we said to people, come to us with an idea, and we will give you up to €1,000 to make that a reality. Because on the camp, people are bored. They don't. They're waiting. It's frustrating. Nothing is in their control. It's a very depressing place to be, on top of all of the difficulties that they've got as refugees. And so when we gave people money to build something, and where it worked really well was in the stores. So people made they bought a range of things that they then sold on the camp. Basics like rice, drinks, and snacks, that kind of thing. Or a restaurant. There were a couple of restaurants as well that built up. And I was really struck by, one of the owners of one of those restaurants. She was called Yasmin. It was Yasmin and her husband Abdul from Syria, and they had 5 children between them. The oldest boy was 16, and then the youngest one was a baby. So they had the whole range there. And what Yasmin said was that before she set up her restaurant, they did nothing. They just they slept in bed until late. They were just waiting. It's a miserable life. And this is about dignity as well. It's not enough. On that camp, people were living in, by that stage in Greece, and in much of the mainland of Greece, people are living in they're called ISO boxes. They're like container-sized houses with toilets and running water and air conditioning and electric light. So in a space that, occasionally there is violence, but it's basically a safe place where people have homes. So at first look, you might think, well, this is okay for them. But, dignity is more than just giving people a roof over their head and just about enough to eat. You need to give people something that they can live for, that nourishes their morale and their brain and their hope for the future. And that restaurant really did it for that family. And once they had their restaurant going, Yasmin, it became a real hub on the camp. People would go there for snacks. the 16-year-old boy became involved in, like he was serving people and he was cooking things and the daughters were involved. I mean, it was lovely. In Cyprus, the Dignity Centre that we run there, I think the sewing space is a really good example as well of where, we are together creating products that people can make, they get money for, and they can sell. But actually, that is being done in a place where people can come away from their crowded, unpleasant housing, because that's where most of them live, to a place where there's smiley volunteers, that they are welcome, where they can chat, they can bring their children, where it just gives them something else to do rather than waiting. And I think that's the life of a lot of refugees. You don't leave your start a new one. You leave your country in a period of in stages. You go somewhere and you go somewhere else, and then you smuggle across a border, and you might get pushed back, and then you go again. And so they have these epic journeys, and then they go somewhere, and then they have to meet an asylum service, which is normally shit. Where they have to wait for ages, where they get treated really badly. Some people in Greece now will be waiting 2 or 3 years for their next interview. And what are they supposed to do during that time?
Yeah.
So the purpose there, it's about work, and I think for the kids it's about school.
I think it's a great initiative also to encourage entrepreneurship and fuel sort of creativity in these individuals, which we all inherently have, and we just need resources to exercise that. Coming to our next question, at Letters of Love, we try to provide psychosocial support to refugee children so that their memories of suffering and trauma can be replaced by memories of happiness. So, speaking of mental health, how important is making refugees self-sufficient or making them self-sufficient? How does it affect the mental health of refugees and their families?
Yeah, so I think, it's just a very, very hard thing to measure, and so all I have is my own experience of this, and I can, one of the reasons that we so strongly believed in dignity was because of the distress that you see people in. And I think as a refugee, one of the defining characteristics of being a refugee is that their family is scattered all over the world. Their friends and family. So they've left home, but they haven't left their family. They might have someone in Germany, or someone in Norway, and someone in Syria, and someone in Lebanon, or some might have gone to Iran. Their family is everywhere, and they don't really know kind of where they are. They're worried about them. So there's sort of the stress about this. The stress of having left everything that's familiar to them. There's the stress of where am I going to be in the future, and then there's the very sad fact that almost all of them will have witnessed some horrific violence, and that might be something that they've seen. They may well have been a victim of it themselves, and unfortunately women, something like 80% will have been sexually assaulted. Something like a half will probably be raped. So, we're talking about massive trauma that they've already experienced before they get to where they are. And then when where they are, so, treating people like humans, giving them time, listening to what their concerns are, respecting their choices, understanding that when they get angry with you over something, it's not personal. They are just angry at their situation and about the conditions that they're having to endure. All of those things are critical. But again, it's sticking plaster time. I think I've seen suicide attempts, self-harm, violence between each other, and I just think that this calls for government intervention, like experts. And as an organisation, a small organisation, sometimes people get in touch and they say, I'm a psychologist or I'm a psychotherapist, and can I come for 2 or 3 weeks? And it's like, no, you have no idea what you're getting into here. What we're talking about is this needs months of professional help. I'm sometimes reluctant to talk about this because refugees are incredibly resilient, resourceful people who just need a bit of support to stand on their own 2 feet, and they will. The majority will be, they will rebuild their life, because the ones who aren't resilient and resourceful, they've died. They've either, they're either stuck where they are, they've died where they are, or they've died on the way. And so the ones that we've been dealing with, who've made those journeys, they just need a bit of help. But we also need to understand that a lot of them are damaged, and they need help, professional help.
Do you guys have a psychologist in your team working?
No, because I've just always been very reluctant to offer psychological support unless it's something that we can guarantee long term. And I mean, you probably know from your own experience. Even if you're not a refugee, but you just had like a bad childhood. Like me, like privileged white male, I can go to a counsellor, and I can be in a counselling for like 2 or 3 years talking about my problems. It requires a huge investment at an individual level. What we've done is tried to create these environments that are ones that are likely to promote healthy behaviour and are healthy for mental health, like a bit of normality by coming to a shop, respecting people as individuals, smiley volunteers, not adding to their stress. One of the things that we did, which we discovered early on, and it was so important, and it's something that you just don't understand until you've been doing this job, is how important it is to be consistent and to deliver on what you say you're going to do. So, people come and they say, my child doesn't have any shoes. And you can't say, oh, well, we'll probably do shoes next week. Because everything hangs on that. And then they come at you, and then it's like, you said you were going to give me some shoes last week, and then you say, oh no, we're only going to try. It's just not good enough. You have to be like, we're running a shop, and that shop is going to open at 10 o'clock every day. And it opens at 10 o'clock, not 5 to, not 5 past, it opens at 10 o'clock every day. And it's open from 10 till 1, and then from 2 till 5. And you are rigid about that. And then when you say to people, when someone says, I need a pair of shoes, you have to say, I can't help you with that right now, even though you've got like a whole room full of shoes. Until you're able to offer everyone a pair of shoes, and you know that you're going to be able to do it, you just have to be like, because you're just adding to people's stress and making their own kind of anxieties worse. So that's where we get into mental health. It's that kind of understanding that people are incredibly stressed. They've had all kinds of trauma and nonsense in their lives, and you just don't want to make it any worse.
Moving on to the next question, can you tell us a little about the challenges that you faced while setting up and refugee support or while administering? Or it might be like clashes with local governments and authorities, or clashes amongst refugees themselves, any sort of challenges that you face?
Yeah, it's just a very, very long list, because you're working, I think, in a very emotional environment where you have people, refugees themselves, or the asylum seekers. They can go from being very calm and friendly to very anxious and upset about things. We have a lot of volunteers, and the great thing about volunteers is that they come full of energy and passion and enthusiasm. And the worst thing about volunteers is that they come with energy and enthusiasm. And like the big problem with volunteers is they just say that I know you want to do this for that person, but we cannot. I know he has a medical problem, and he needs to go to hospital, but we can't do that. We're not a medical NGO. I know you want to give that family a pair of shoes because you think they're a special case. Mate, everybody is a special case. If we give that family a pair of shoes now, yeah, you will feel better as a volunteer, but tomorrow I'm going to have 20 families banging on our door asking for a pair of shoes. How are we going to manage that? So volunteers have been brilliant They brought ideas and enthusiasm and energy, and they've kept what we do fresh. But keeping them focused is a real challenge. Government. The Greek government is a nightmare. They don't really care about refugees. They're fulfilling their obligations, but they're heartless. And dealing with a heartless government, bureaucratic, corrupt bodies like that, it is very wearing. You just think it's not just and it's not fair, and then I have to look after my own mental health. Local populations have been pretty good. In Bangladesh, it was difficult, but in Greece, sometimes people think of refugees as like hordes of young men, and young men do tend to be overrepresented for very good reasons, because they're the ones who have to flee because they have to go and they get told to serve in an army that they don't want to serve in, or the family sends their fittest and most able on to get money to send back. So young men tend to be overrepresented, but actually it's mostly families. I don't think that anyone wants to see, apart from monsters, no one wants to see children hungry and in need. And Greece is a very hospitable, like conservative but family focused place. And we had very little hostility from local populations. It was one of our missions was to get money to spend it locally. And so we formed kind of very strong alliances with local businesses. We spent a lot of money. And so we formed alliances with local businesses who then became very strong supporters of what we did. And so the local population is less of a challenge. I think I've probably talked about all of the challenges that you have with working with a group of people who are in need and whose needs you will never be able to satisfy. So, personally, I suppose one of the biggest challenges is just having to say no all the time. I have to say no to volunteers. I have to say no to refugees and asylum seekers. I have to say no. I know you want this, and I can see that it's a desperate need. It's just not something we can do.
There's often an apprehension among countries that refugees are an economic burden on the host economy. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I see that, and I don't. It's just one of those areas where I don't think facts seem to play much of a role when it comes to trying to persuade people. So the facts are that yes, there sometimes is a short-term economic cost to integrating refugees, but over the long term, refugees and immigrants generally, actually, they pay more taxes, they're more likely to work, their kids will do better at school. So the facts are that if there is a short-term economic cost, that can easily be mediated with the right kind of investment. And if you're going to look a bit longer term, 4 or 5 years, then there will be a benefit to the host nation. But I can see border frontline states in Europe, like Greece and Italy, are having to take on the burden because the rest of Europe is saying, you deal with it, we don't want to. It might seem like it's a big cost, but I think that's because people have fears and they inflate what are kind of real concerns. And when you see refugee camps, thousands of people, it looks like it's something that's going to be a huge burden. It really isn't. Europe, particularly in Europe, I can get really angry about this because Europe is incredibly wealthy. We're incredibly populous. There's 500 million of us. We can easily take in a few million people. It's not a problem. We've just made it a massive problem because of our own hostility and xenophobia. But yeah, I see that, and as I was saying earlier, some people come. Lots of refugees come with massive problems, and and sometimes it's mental health, post-traumatic stress, and sometimes it's physical as well. A lot of them got conflict injuries. They need treatment. But the evidence is over the long term there's an economic benefit, but I'm and sometimes we have to make that argument, but I'm reluctant to make this argument because I think it's more of a moral obligation than one that is in our economic interest to take in refugees. And I think what that means is, if someone's in a burning house, you don't keep the door locked.
Right.
If someone's drowning, you don't chuck them back overboard again. We have an obligation to help our fellow humans, and this is completely idealistic. But I don't see why we can't do it. I believe in a world with no borders.
Climate change has the potential to create far greater displacement than we have seen in the recent years. However, as we know, there is no legal recognition of climate refugees today. So do you think legislation is essential in this case?
Yeah, it is actually moving that way. So if you have a look, it was only about 3 weeks ago, I think, the Human Rights Commission of the UN. Did you see that, the New Zealand?
Yeah, they recognized climate refugees.
That's right. Yeah. So they said that they shouldn't send this person back if climate change was going to lead to a loss of their dignity and an impact on their human rights. So, it is changing. So I think it will need to change because I think we already see it. We were in Mexico, and a lot of those people in Mexico had come from Honduras. Their crops have been failing for 3 or 4 years because of climate change. And in fact, Syria, that civil war is blamed on Assad, and he should take the blame for that. And the Arab Spring. But one of the reasons that there was so much discontent in Syria was because the crops had been failing there prior to 2013 as well. So it is already working, and the numbers the numbers having to flee because of climate change will dwarf the numbers that are fleeing now, and that will rise very, very quickly. But that's also the reason why legislation won't come in, is because what I see is actually walls being built and not bridges. I see barriers being put up and not ways for people to easily get asylum. But they will still come. They're not going to stay at home and die.
People across the world are very detached from the refugee crisis. Even if I speak of my family, they weren't aware. And in fact, my grandmother has been a refugee herself when India and Pakistan were partitioned, and she had to flee to India. She was a resident of Pakistan, then India, but she had to flee. But still, people are at least in India, and I'm guessing in a lot of places otherwise also, because at Letters of Love we conduct sensitization lessons in classrooms so that children can become aware of the refugee crisis. So how can we as ordinary citizens, what can we do to alleviate the refugee crisis, and how can we inculcate more awareness among people about the refugee crisis?
Yeah, and I think there's this sense of the other, and I defy anybody to meet an asylum seeker or refugee and then condemn them when they know them, and you just see that all of the time. I think it is. I don't know how we can facilitate more contact between people who aren't refugees or asylum seekers at the moment. And those who are, because when they get to meet them, or when they get to hear more about them, then I think that their attitude do begin to shift. I think we need to accept that there's going to be, I don't know what it's like in India, but I'm going to say in the UK that there's something like 20% of the people, it doesn't matter what we say or do, they're hostile. They always will be, and we just need to. With them we just need to fight them, and we need to defeat them. I mean, to make sure they don't get any bigger. But and then there's another 20% who are like, let's say on our side, who just think that we should do everything possible. And then we've got these people in the middle. And these people in the middle, they're the people who don't want to see kids dying. They are worried about whether there's enough people, like whether there's enough room in the schools or the hospitals or houses for everybody. Whether they're going to come over with their funny ways and like with their crazy food and all that sort of stuff. So I think with those people, it's to meet them, and I think we need to talk to them. You need Sewing Space on our website is how they lived their lives before they fled, and how they are now. They're the same as anybody. I mean, I think what people fail to understand is that we could all be refugees. And it's one of the things that I quickly felt when on a refugee camp with the Syrian people. I remember one guy I was talking to. He said, I had a restaurant. My kids were going to school. They were doing really well. I had my friends and my family were all around me. And then the missiles started dropping. And then groups of men turned up with guns, and it just happened out of nowhere. And this can happen anywhere, even where you think you're safe. It can happen anywhere, and it's not like those people had a choice. They didn't have a choice. They had to leave or die. What are you going to do?
We've already addressed the next question, but what has been the response of the immediate local communities when the refugees arrive? Do they wish to integrate with them, or is there a prejudice against them? And I've read in articles and stuff that with the increase in crime rate in certain areas, they've grown really anti-refugee. So how is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you don't give people enough to eat, they're going to do what they can. So crime is a product of how people are being treated, and I think it's something that changes over time. So. If I think about all the places where we've worked, where when people have first arrived, the local population has kind of come out and they've opened their doors, they've provided food, they've kind of gone to their community, they've collected clothes and shoes, and they've said how can we help? But over a bit of time, unless things change, they get fatigued with that, and it's like, why are you still here? Why haven't you gone away and moved on? Or I don't blame them. I mean, but I don't blame them if that's if the government is failing to look after people well enough, so that the burden continues to fall on the local community to provide charity for people. That's a failing government.
Proceeding to the last question to conclude. What is Refugee Support's vision for 2020, and how do you plan to implement it? And how can we help?
Thank you. I mean, I think it's really difficult because they don't have very much, and they face all of those problems that I was talking about. But it's as nothing compared to those people who are stuck in some of those big camps in Jordan or Lebanon, or the Rohingya in Bangladesh. The conditions are far worse. And we've been looking at whether we help in another city in Cyprus, because we're in Cyprus, whether we return to Greece, because the numbers fleeing from Turkey into Greece continue to rise. And I think with the problem in Idlib at the moment, and the problem with the conflict between the Kurds and the Turkish in Turkey, that we will see even more people coming from Turkey towards Greece. Do we go back there and help? The situation on the islands where people are arriving is horrific. And then we've been looking at Venezuela as well. And it's like, we're a small organisation. Where do we go? We want to go where the need is greatest. But some of these places are so massive and so complex, it's very difficult to know kind of where best to go. So our vision at the moment is we have a model which we call our Dignity Centre in Cyprus. We've been working on that for almost a year now. We now know kind of pretty well what works and what doesn't work. We're looking at opening another centre in Cyprus, but it could be that that we decide that actually we're better off spending our scarce resources, because that's the reality of an organisation like ours. We're better off spending our scarce resources in Greece, or we go and help one of the big problems where we know we can make a big difference in Colombia with Venezuelans crossing the border there. So that's a bit vague. One of our advantages as a small organisation is that we can move really quickly. If John and I decide we're going to go and do something in Colombia, we could go and start that next week. And that's what we did in Mexico. We just decided, let's just go to Mexico. Like 2 weeks after deciding we were there, and then within 4 or 5 days of arriving there, we were serving 400 hot meals a day on the street. And it's just know that when you go somewhere where people are in need, and you have a belief that you can do something, putting dignity at the heart of what you do, with a bit of money to get started, because more money will come once you start doing something. That you can achieve these things quickly and without a lot of preparation. But I was a market researcher in business for 20 years, so I do struggle a little bit without the 3-year strategy. We have done them from time to time. And how to help? Yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. I think your project's brilliant. It's lovely. It's connecting people. The whole philosophy behind it. Lots of energy. Pumping out the information about. These are just people, like any other people. Who've got the same kind of needs as the rest of us. They're just going through a very difficult time in their life, and they need a bit of extra support. It's great.
Thank you. This has been truly enriching and equally heartbreaking. Do you have any questions or queries for us?
No, I'm just very, really, really, as you can probably tell, really happy to talk about this. It's been a big journey for us, and John and I have worked really hard to set the thing up and to keep it going. But actually, when I look at it, all we've done is just given people who really want to help an opportunity to come and do that, an opportunity to come and be effective on the ground, and it's given us the opportunity to meet people like you and Pooja and be part of a group of people who aren't going to just rage at the TV, or who aren't going to stick their heads in the sand, who are going to think, yeah, that's not good enough, I'm going to go and help and just do something. We're not going to solve, we're not going to help, we can't solve all the problems, we can't help everybody, but we can do a bit, and, we've made a massive difference to some individuals. Some of those kids will remember those letters all their lives.
Yeah.
Just don't know. I feel exhausted sometimes, and incredibly privileged.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.
It's been extremely nice speaking to you.